Okay, I think we should get going. So, again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Appreciate you being here. Um, I am Kyle Gatch. I'm a developer experience engineer with Chromatic and Storybook, and I am delighted to invite Rachel to join us for this webinar. Rachel, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
I'm Rachel. I'm a front-end engineer. I work on design systems, which for me means components, accessibility, the durability stuff that decides whether a component survives contact with production. I've been using coding agents every day for over 2 years. Most of what I'm going to show you today came out of, frankly, being annoyed. So, yeah. Hello, all.
That's fertile ground for creation, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so this webinar is, as the title says, why agents get front-end context wrong, but we're also going to show some ways to fix that and make sure that they get it right. So let's get into it. Um,
So, yeah, agents are building interfaces now, ready or not. Um, Somebody on your team brings you a prototype out of Replit or Lovable, and it runs and it looks right in the screenshot, but none of the care that went into your design system is anywhere in it. No tokens, your button has been re-implemented from scratch without the focus states. So you get handed the last 20%. And the last 20% is the part that makes our jobs especially painful. Um, and next slide, please. Um, Here's the first way it goes wrong. The agent has no context at all. Nothing tells it your design system exists, so it does what it can. It reads your code base, or worse, it goes digging through node modules trying to work out what components you have and how to call them. It burns tokens doing that and it usually ends up still guessing. So the goal here is that we want to give the agent context for the design system, but agents don't read it the way we do. Nobody is opening your beautiful Storybook stock site and admiring your usage guidelines. They consume the metadata, the types, and the examples. And when that context is thin or wrong, they don't stop and ask you. They end up making something up. If we want agents to actually use our design systems, we have to surface the information the way agents want it. The second way is the context is there, but it's partial. The agent knows a card exists, but has no idea what props it takes, or the types come through clean and there's nothing at all about when you'd use one. Partial context is worse than none because it looks like it worked. S- So that's two ways context goes wrong. Here's what I actually want. I want the design system to be the thing the agent reaches for first. I want it to be the default, not a suggestion the agent works around. I want it pulling from the actual components that have been hardened and already accessible because somebody on my team fought for those focus states and I'd like them to survive. And I want anyone on the team to be able to describe an idea and get something close to shippable back. That's why Storybook MCP got my attention. It makes the design system the source of truth an agent reads from. Kyle, this next part is yours.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, the Storybook MCP and skills, if you've been following along, we're kind of in a journey between MCP and skills right now. But everything we're talking about pertains to both, no matter which you're using. So I'll keep saying Storybook MCP though. So the Storybook MCP is built on Storybook itself, and Storybook is kind of built on three pillars: dev, docs, and test. So for the MCP, the dev pillar means that the agent can develop components in isolation. The docs pillar means that it can read document types and component usage and use the components well. And then the test pillar means the agent can component test what it builds to validate its work. as well as provide visual output because it's writing stories as it goes. Now, this webinar is just going to focus on the docs portion of what MCP can do, but I did want to kind of provide a complete picture of what it does. So that docs portion, what it does is it pulls in metadata that's in your storybook from all kinds of sources and locations. Um, and those are the actual source code of your component and the props of that component. And so that's looking at types, JS doc annotations, um, the export name of the component, where it's imported from, all that information. It's also looking at your stories because those are great examples for the agent to understand how to use your component. And then it's also looking at the MDX documentation that you might have in your storybook. So all the non-story documentation will also pull that in and make it available to the agent if you want. You can control what's available. So the MCP sucks up all that information, or actually storybook itself is sucking up all that information, and then it transforms it into a more machine readable, compact, efficient to transport format that we call a component manifest. And then it gives that to the agent. And that's what agents actually see. Um, so that manifest looks something like this. Don't worry about reading the JSON on the left. That's just really for illustration, but that is a real example. And so this contains for each component in your storybook, it contains its ID, the name of the component, the paths to both the stories and the component source, an import snippet, all the information we get from the docgen. So that's like React docgen or React docgen TypeScript. So we pull in, and that's the display and export names of the component. If there's a description with JSDoc, all your prop types and any JSDoc annotations you've applied to your props. By JSDoc, I mean that special comment so that you can like add additional information like a description or if something's deprecated. And then the first three stories, we'll pull in the ID, the name, and the snippet there. And we just do the first three because it turns out that's most of the time all the agent needs. And if it needs more, we give it the tools to go ahead and fetch the full list of stories and then go into more detail. So that's what a manifest looks like. But like the tool, especially the docgen part of this tool, um, it's not perfect in how it translates and how it extracts all that metadata. And so we also built this debugger to try to surface some of the issues that can arise as it's doing that. And so I have a screenshot here showing two examples. So for the badge component, this is more of a warning, but it's saying, hey, you don't have a component description. And so the agent is probably not able to like discern why or when it should use the badge component. So that's more of a warning. Like it's not critical, but something you should consider. The banner, though, that's a straight up error, and it's telling me, hey, like we didn't return anything for this component. And so from the agent's perspective, the banner doesn't exist. It's not aware that the banner is a component that it can use. And so that's something you might really want to fix. So this debugger is helpful, but it has some pretty significant shortcomings. One is that this UI is kind of completely separate from the rest of Storybook. Like it's in a like special URL. There's no button to access it from within the Storybook UI. So it's just a separate experience. It would be a lot better if you could look at the story that it's telling you, or look at the component that it's telling you to fix as you fix it. And the other is as you're fixing things. So let's say I want to fix this banner error. So I hit save on my component file and nothing happens, even if I hit refresh. And that's because you have to actually restart the whole Storybook dev server to get this to refresh properly. So those shortcomings gave Rachel an idea that she's going to share.
Yeah. So that debugger is where the oversight story begins. I added Storybook's MCP so Claude Code would stop rebuilding components I'd already shipped, and yet it still rebuilt them. I asked it to build a feature. It came back with a plan that included building a badge. And I had a badge. I'd shipped it. It was in the sidebar of the Storybook running on my machine at that moment. The only reason I understood what had happened is because I'd been poking around in the manifest debugger and looking to that giant components.json. Otherwise, I would have assumed the agent was just bad at its job and moved on. My components weren't documented in a way the agent could see. So the docs rendered fine, they rendered in Storybook, but the agent doesn't necessarily read Storybook, it reads the manifest. So human docs and machine readable manifests are different artifacts. Doing one of them well tells you nothing about the other. Nothing in my workflow was going to tell me which one I had. It was failing silently. So I built Oversight. It's a linter for the component manifest, and all it checks is whether the components are documented well enough for an agent to use them. The goal was to make manifest gaps visible while you can still fix them without adding a dependency tree to anyone's build. It's zero dependencies, so it runs anywhere. There are three packages to the Oversight family. We have the add-on, which links the manifest live while you work. It's a panel on the add-on drawer and a block at the bottom of the docs page. Oversight lint is the CLI. It lints the built manifest and fails the build when a change drops a component's docs. And finally, the oversight lint action, which wraps that CLI as a GitHub action and reports findings on each pull request. And same rules are in all three. So what you might see in the add-on panel is what blocks the merge, etc.
Yeah, and I just want to interject here real quick to say that I really appreciate the way that Rachel has provided this full experience. She didn't just build a linter. She didn't just build an add-on. She built something that fits all developers and how they work. So maybe you prefer to work within Storybook and within the Storybook UI, you can use the add-on for that. And we'll show this in the demo. Um, or maybe you don't want to mess with it while you're developing. You just want it to be a check when you actually push a PR and to make sure that like things are staying good as you're pushing. Well, that's perfect for the lint tool, and especially she made it even easier with the action. And so that's kind of why we wanted Rachel on for the webinar is because she's built a great tool here that works across a variety of surfaces. I'm going
And
to share the repo for this tool, by the way.
yeah, so thank you so much, Kyle. So on to the rules. Now there are currently 10 rules to oversight. In this session, we are going to focus on demoing three in particular. DocGen missing is an error. The extraction failed outright for that entry. So as far as the agent is concerned, that component has no props at all. Docs link dangling is an error as well. A description might link to a component ID, and the ID isn't in the manifest anymore because somebody renamed something. That's worse than no link because to an agent it reads like an answer. And this is something that I commonly come across when I go in one of my late night fits of renaming a bunch of components. So it's a great way to catch it. And the last one is required prop undocumented, which is an error, and it's the one I'd flag if you take nothing else away. Required prop with no description means the agent knows it has to pass something and has no idea what. It doesn't stop and ask, it just picks something plausible, and plausible tends not to be the same as correct. Severities are defaults, but you can change any one of them, and you can exempt a component with a JS doc tag. Let's go see all three of those.
Yeah, that leads us to our demo.
Yeah. So give me a second just to reorient my screen. Okay. So let me move y'all over there. And I'll share my desktop. Um, Here is the oversight demo repository Kyle is sharing in the chat. If you guys want to follow along, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check out the findings branch because that's where our components actually are failing. Um, so when an agent, let's see, where is that? When an agent, oh, when an agent asks your storybook about a component, it isn't reading your source or your docs tab. It reads one JSON file and this is it. Oversight is linting this file, and I want you to start where you'd actually run into it, which is right here while you're working. Let me just make sure we're running. Oh, whoops. Um, so let's see, we're on the right branch. So I'm just gonna run Storybook and beautiful. Okay. So um the first one we're gonna discuss is media row. Um, this is the oversight panel, which exists on the default page, not the docs page. Um, One error is on media row. Its description links to another component, and that link points at a manifest ID that doesn't exist. So if we look at the docs, actually, this becomes even more apparent. So in our component description, we have all this text, and this looks like a link that's going to work. Now we click on it, it doesn't go anywhere. So when we look down and I added the optional docs block to my storybook instance, you'll see this little helpful strike through that this is not in the manifest. And what this means is that it's referring to a manifest ID, which is something you can see on, where is it? Man, sorry. Where is the manifest?
Just go to JSON and then change it to .html
Oh,
instead of JSON.
that's useful. Okay.
There you
Oh, and then also another thing is I have this helpful link
go.
for the manifest debugger that takes you there actually. Um, so really when we link to a component, we're using this, which is the stable ID. But if you change the names of your component, that will change. So the way that we fix this is by taking this ID, and I'm just going to switch to cursor. Um, and I am just going to change this to surfaces media row and save that and can refresh and no findings. Yay. So you'll see that now that we've fixed it, that is both working as well as this, and you don't have to strike through anymore.
Yeah, I
Um,
love the thoughtfulness of this particular rule, because it helps humans, but it also helps agents. Like you can all imagine if an agent encounters a link that doesn't actually work, it's either going to go searching to try to find like where that link should have been pointing, or sometimes it's going to like try to complete a media panel story and docs and everything because it thinks it should exist. And so this just like cuts it off at the head.
Oops. I realized it was supposed to be card. My bad. I was like, wait, this does not make sense. Okay, there we go. Media card. So now when the agent is looking to see, okay, what should I use instead? It can then follow the link using the path that we've given it. Um, and yeah, so the next one we're going to talk through is the step input. Um, so there's two findings here, and they're the same problem twice. A warning that a prop is undocumented and an error because that prop is required. Um, Label appears to have no description. So you'll see here there's no description, but it doesn't necessarily warn you. You have that helpful little required thing, but we need to fix this so that way we can remove these findings. Another thing that's helpful is this hint link that Kyle actually made a great suggestion that I'm going to fix in a future version where he suggested when you click it, it'll copy and paste a prompt for Claude Code or whichever AI you are using to be able to fix it, which I love that idea. Thank you, Kyle. Um, and so let's go ahead and fix that. So let's go to Chrome and okay. So we are going to add, um, let's see, what should, a a label for the input. Really creative. So I'm going to save that. And then here, let's look at the default view and refresh. And we get the nice little clapping hands because we fixed it. And you'll see in the docs, you now have this helpful little thing. I probably could have come up with a better identifier, but that's that. Um,
Honestly, with all the components I built, I struggle to come up with labels for things that are so obvious like that.
Yeah. And really, the issue, it's less so like for the on clicks, the on changes. Usually an agent can figure out what that is. But you'd be surprised how frequently it will look only to the prop names alone. And any component that shares as prop names, it might end up mixing those up because of the way the MCPs tend to work. And next, we are going to go to the dropdown. And I'm looking at the docs page, and you'll see that there's no docgen. So um, you might think, oh, it's a drop down, obviously, but basically we are making a guess and we can go to the hint. It says check the export shape and the story's meta component first, then the TypeScript React docgen. Um, so we're gonna go fix this in Cursor. Um, so Oh wait, one more thing. So I want to show you that this props table has all of our props appropriately documented, but it doesn't necessarily know what the dropdown should be used for. So I go into I go into sorry, one second. So the docs UI and the manifest are using different extraction paths. So the page you check when you want to know whether something's documented isn't the file your agent reads. Dropdown appears to be fully documented, but it might be completely empty in the manifest. Um, so let's go to the stories to see what's going on because if we look in here, oh, look, we already have a JS doc. So what is going on here? And we're going to go into the stories and see that, okay, so I rigged this one a bit. So meta.component is pointing to a memoized component, and that's constructed right here in the stories file. So Storybook static analysis can't trace it back to the source file. The real version is a component wrapped in a memoization, with a forward ref. So we need to change this to use the base drop down. And we're going to save that. And the great thing is the story is still going to render the memoized version. I'm only changing what the docs are pointing at. So let's see what happens next. Okay, so now you'll see the description is up here, which typically would happen if we weren't memoizing it. And you'll see the description is here and no findings. So uh, that's the full payload now, all 5 props with their descriptions, and it took changing the one token. Um,
Yeah. What I appreciate about this example is it really illustrates um, that pitfall where you can have a false sense of security by looking at the props table and seeing it there and thinking that, oh, since I can see it, the agent can see it. And unfortunately, that's not quite the case. The Storybook team is working on fixing that kind of fundamental bug with how Storybook and our MCP work. But in the meantime, you've got this great tool to make sure that it doesn't go awry.
yeah, so all 3 of those turned up while I was already looking at the component, and none of it needed a commit or a push or a CI run. Um, so what if we wanted to see them all failing at once? Um, let's head back to the terminal.
Actually, Rachel, before you
Oh,
switch to that, can you show how this is also available when you're looking at a story? It's not just the docs block here.
yeah. So you'll see it here. And if I undo those changes, save that, I can refresh it and you'll see
Yeah.
DocGen missing.
Yeah. I
So
imagine for most people, this will probably be the more common way that they use the add-on. So I just wanted to be sure we showed that.
yeah. And hopefully we can end up integrating it into the test provider thing at a later point. Um, so yeah, let's see how we can see these all at once because you're seeing them one by one. So let's go into the CLI. So let's get, wait, ah, Zoom go away. I'm just gonna clear those changes and now I'm gonna run npm run lint docs, which under the hood is just an npx command, which means that it has no dependencies, which is great because say if you don't use GitHub, you use something else, GitLab or something, it can still work for you. So it's going through and it's linting those docs, and you'll see, okay, we got the same exact results. And that helpful little hint that you hovered over is right here. So it'll tell you exactly how to fix it. um, Kyle said, okay, I'll just copy and paste this into Claude Code. I'm like, exactly. So it's
Yeah.
giving you all of the information that you need or Claude needs, or whichever agent you prefer, and telling it, okay, this is where you need to go to figure this out. Um, and yeah, so uh, let's see. Okay. Um,
I think this might be a good opportunity to answer a couple questions before we move on to the next part.
sure.
So Michelle has a question. So oversight essentially closes the gap between Storybook and what agents can actually read by showing the human what the agent cannot see via the manifest debugger and strikeout context. Like basically, she's just confirming that her understanding of oversight is correct.
Yeah.
Does it sound like she's got
Yeah.
it?
That's exactly what happened. And I basically came up with this because of my own frustration. I ended up doing a bandage using Claude.md, but I determined, okay, clearly I'm probably not the only person that's going to run into this. So that's why I built oversight. Thank you.
Yeah. And then we've had a number of questions about support. So I'll take the first part or the storybook part of this. Um, so the docs portion of the storybook MCP right now only works with React. Um, However, if any of you have been seeing the alpha releases, or I think we actually just went to beta today for Storybook 10.6, we
Ooh.
are adding Vue and Angular support to that. So you'll be able to use the like all the manifest generation, all that kind of stuff will also work with Angular and Vue in Storybook 10.6, which is coming in just like a couple weeks. But Rachel had the foresight, no pun intended, I guess, to build oversight in a way that will always work with all of it, no matter what Storybook supports. Um, so if we add like web components support in the future, which we hope to do, oversight will work with that with no changes. So how did you do that, Rachel?
Yeah, so basically, I knew about the limitation. I'm a React person, so I do tend to favor React, but I knew that those other frameworks are coming. So basically, because of the way HEPA, right? Am I saying
Yep.
Yepa. Yepa built the MCP and his colleagues at Storybook is they made it a static JSON file. So really, regardless of if you're using Angular or web components, it will still look to the same place in order to tell the agent exactly what props it has, when to grab for a certain component, etc. So, yeah. Is there any other questions or should I continue?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
Please continue.
Um, so yeah, and this takes us to our GitHub action. Um, Here you can see, I'll show you what it looks like. It's very simple. Essentially, it just requires that you run a build on the storybook and then uses this lint action. Um, and that's it. And basically, what you get is this little check mark or failure showing you exactly where you went wrong. There's this little summary that shows you, okay, no findings because we're on the main branch. Now, to show you what happens, say if, okay, I renamed the media card to media tile, and we look at the diff, looks fine. Okay, cool. Nothing wrong with that. But then we look to the checks and we're like, oh no, this is failing. What happened? So let's go to the summary and see. Um, oh, okay. So we have one of those docs link dangling issues where we are linking to the old component name. So it's telling me exactly where we need to fix it. And essentially, if you have that check as a blocker, it'll keep your main branch from failing. Um, so basically, if you fix the commit, you can then rerun it and it'll go green. Um, I don't, okay. And and that's the whole setup. Check out, node, install, build your storybook, run the action. There's no manifest path needed, no configuration. Kyle asked me to show this because people assume it's way more complicated, and it's not. Um, you just watch the same rules turn up to the component while I was working across the whole system in a terminal and blocking a pull request where nobody could have caught it in review. And you saw a component that looks fully documented until you ask what the agent actually gets. Oversight doesn't write your docs, it merely tells you when the pipeline has dropped them. Um, Let me stop sharing. One thing before questions, everything I just showed you points in the same direction to document things more. And that's right up to a point. And Kyle has some benchmarks on where that is at the moment.
Yeah, let me show that. Believe it's there we go. Yeah, so there's one final way that context can go wrong in for front-end development, and that's actually providing too much. Um, so we had a question in the chat. It wasn't quite relevant to what Rachel was sharing, but I'll discuss it now. And the question kind of came down to, I'm really having our team is having trouble organizing our storybook, especially with agents. Like it just kind of goes haywire. And that is an experience that we've heard a lot about. We actually suffer from it ourselves, building the Chromatic app. Really, any decently sized app is gonna struggle to organize their storybook well. So what we've done is we've created an example project and an example design system. So the project consumes that design system. And we've done very rigorous, statistically relevant evaluations of lots of variations on how that storybook is organized, what it includes, things like that. So I'm only showing two of them, but we have like a dozen different variations. And so it's things like give the agents only docs, don't give them any stories, or the opposite, only give it stories and no docs. Or what I'm showing here, the purple line I remember right. Let me make sure I get it right. Sorry, the blue line is just like a basic amount of docs. So really just the component description and then stories. No like usage guidelines or anything like that. Whereas the purple is kind of all the bells and whistles. It's got do's and don'ts, usage guidelines, accessibility guidelines, like everything we could think of that a design system would include in documentation. And what we're seeing here is that both the speed and the cost of tasks performed by the agent they're actually worse with more documentation. And I think on the surface, it's easy to understand that, okay, well, like, yeah, it bloated the context window. And so of course it's gonna like be speed and cost more. Um, but it's a little more nuanced than that. And there's actually kind of some second order effects of providing too much docs as well. So we're still polishing this up. We're making sure it's like well presentable and kind of we can tell a good story with it. Right now, it's kind of raw data, but I did want to give you a little bit of a preview of this project that we've invested quite a bit of time in because we want you to understand um, both how MCP helps, MCP and skills, again, how all this helps working with agents and storybook, but also how you can kind of organize your storybook to do that well. So I hope that made sense. Um, and now we're going to just kind of move on to general Q&A. So, yeah, please use the Q&A widget, like I said, which may be in like the more part of the Zoom toolbar, or you can also use chat. There's not too many of us this time, so I can keep track of it. Um, one question that came up, Rachel, I think you might be a little better positioned to answer this. They're hoping to see how the code changed in the actual manifest as you fixed something. And I think the question underneath the question is about, let's see, let me find it. Um, to does the manifest output as plain HTML? Some design systems export HTML rather than React code to the consumer, although React code might be used in story files itself. So I think really they just kind of want a closer look at a manifest file. I was wondering if you could
Yeah,
show that.
sure. Now let's see what we can pull up. Um, so let's see. One second. Let me share my screen again.
Oh, I might have to stop.
Oh, oh, whoops. Okay. Um, okay. So let's go back and we're still running Storybook. So if we go to um, the components, you'll see there's this little red dot saying no component file found for the drop-down component. And I would frankly point you to look at manifest debugger because looking at the components.json is a bit overwhelming. Um, but basically what it's saying here is that the component file is not found. And if we go ahead and fix that to be base dropdown, we can then refresh and you'll see that this has since gone green. Um, Another way that you can easily get to this whoops, uh, is by going to this. I added this little link linking to this manifest debugger, and that will take you there as well. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure if I covered all of your questions.
Um, I apologize. I was in the chat. Did you actually show the JSON?
Oh, no, I could if that.
Yeah, I think that's what
Okay,
they want to see
let's
the
pretty
actual.
print this. Um,
Yeah.
so this is it succeeding. So you'll see the base drop down. It has a nice description. But if I change it back and save it, refresh, pretty print, you will see this error, no component import found. Um, and this is despite the fact that, okay, this looks like it's working, but then you look to this and you'll see, oh, it's it's actually not. So instead of looking to here or to here, I'm just giving you a different way of viewing that information.
Yeah. And if you
Um,
go back to that JSON, yeah. So if you look in stories, just the first one there in the array, it's kind of right in the middle of your screen. The snippet property, that's the code to make the story. And I think this is where the HTML would show up if there was any. And I think we can see here that it is not. It is JSX. It's been Unicode escaped, so it's hard to read, but that is definitely JSX and not
and
HTML.
I can refresh it so that way you can see what it looks like when it's fixed.
Sure.
Um, where is that?
You'll have to scroll a lot because now all the props are in there. Yeah,
Oh,
there you
okay.
go. So now it's right at the top of the screen where it says const default. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So I think that answers the question where no, it does not use HTML in the output. So to get proper HTML support, we'll have to build that in Storybook. We do have plans to expand our MCP support to every core framework, and then that should then make it a lot easier for the community frameworks like HTML to add their support. Okay. Do we have any more questions? They've been great so far. Thanks for all the really interesting things to think about. Hmm. I actually have a question, Rachel. I'm curious. So you mentioned like you came up with this idea out of an annoyance. I think that's so valid. I'm curious now that you've built it, like how have you been using it in your work?
Yeah, the biggest thing is just like I have a tendency late at night, much to my colleagues' chagrin, I tend to like to rename a bunch of things. And if I do that and there's no check to make sure that the links are still propagating through, um, that can break a lot of things, especially for the MCP consumer that's relying on this in order to take those components and make it into something more production ready. Like that really cool slide you had with all the charts pointing exactly to um, how you take a design system and you can make um, an app per se. So I found that having those safeguards, even as even on my own side projects, um, where no one is there to check me every time I make a change, it's just a great way to make sure I'm following those best practices. Um, and really, you should use Claude Code for a lot of this. You can point it to the oversight docs. It'll show it or you how to properly document your component in a way that the MCP is going to understand and in a way that won't trip up any of those errors or findings.
Very cool. Yeah, I think we're all our own worst enemy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's very clever to build a tool to safeguard that.
Yeah.
By the way, I just want to say I absolutely love our community here in the storybook and chromatic world. Everybody's been so kind in the chat and very encouraging. So thank you for that, everybody. Deepak has a question. Have you explored using index files and splitting the JSON, the manifest, into chunks to limit the context? Yes. In fact, 10.6 is actually going to ship that change.
Ah,
Um, yeah, I was going
yay.
to talk to you about that, Rachel.
Oh, that's so great. So
Yeah, so
that way
that'll
it won't use as much context.
not up front. That's right. Yeah,
Oh,
right now it has to kind of download that whole manifest first, and yeah, we made it to where it's just an index of components, and then and their summaries or descriptions. So it has a
yeah.
little bit of an idea of like what to look into next.
So that description will be all the more important to be able to, because if you name things
Yes.
in a way that the agent doesn't necessarily understand, like I know people use the term pill, they'll use the term tag, they'll use the term badge, and you don't want it to guess where to use that. So, yeah.
Yep. Yep. I think it's very, for those who have been using agents for a while, it's very akin to the way that you need to add a description to your skill in the front matter. Or if you've written an MCP tool, you have a description there too. It's also the agent can know what to do. And when you do it in Storybook, it honestly helps humans too, because then it displays on your docs page. Yeah. And we do have ways to give a different description for an agent versus a human. So that's all in the Storybook docs.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm thinking of doing next is adding a test provider. So the test widget has the accessibility checks, um, and the API hasn't been set up yet for that, but I've been talking with Michael Schulman, who's um, what is his title again, Kyle?
He's the tech lead for the Storybook project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you'll see them on GitHub in the issues often. And so basically, I'm hoping to give them a hardened use case to build out the ability to add your own test provider to be able to run these things in a way that will fail things in Chromatic if you subscribe. So,
Yeah, we're very excited about that. When we built the test provider, we kind of made it roughly extensible, but we like didn't document that API and we didn't put too much effort into it because we couldn't think of a use case ourselves that wasn't trivial. And we know that that's not going to produce a good API. And so now that we have a legitimate good use case, we're hoping that we can harden up that API and get it published. Um, and just concretely, what that would allow is what you saw as we like looked at the docs or an individual story that was only running on the currently viewed component. And what, if it's in the test widget with a test provider, what it would allow is just clicking one button and you'd effectively get the same results as the CLI tool did with like every component, but in the storybook. And so you could have your sidebar light up with this one's good, this one's bad. and you could even filter down to just the bad ones. So you could stay in Storybook the whole time instead of having to jump to CLI and back. It's pretty cool. We're discussing an add-on, like extending the functionality, but the base functionality itself is really great too, because you can run component tests and accessibility checks that way. If you want more information on that, we have a bunch of webinars covering it. Actually, here I'll drop a link. We have a new page on the Chromatic site where we have all of our webinars. So,
A comment related to what Dominique said, is related to getting Claude to actually write documentation plainly. One thing that I've found helpful,
ah,
and again, it's a balancing act with adding too much context, is saying, um, if you want to make this if you want a clickable component, use this, and then you do that little path link. Um, so I found it's been helpful for, say, if the agent wants to go to one component, it might end up reconsidering using that component because you are linking it to somewhere else in the case that so it's useful to make sure that your documentation says what it is used for, but also giving it reasonable alternatives. And that can just be born out of seeing it reach for the wrong component. I found that it's very hard to get that correct without trying it, saying like, oh, I want an interface that has a login component, and you see that it chooses the wrong thing for a tooltip, things like that. Um, but also you can get better ideas on ways to name your components, like what Kyle was saying with 10.6. I was going to use the name and the description as kind of a top line thing before going into more detail. So,
yeah. I want to share my screen just real quick. Um, this is my entire Claude.md, not for a project, but for like my user. Um, and so I just wanted to share. I'll put it in the Zoom chat as well if you want to copy paste it. But um, I use Claude a lot to help with writing storybooks, docs, especially, or even internal stuff as well with the team. And this has been a huge win. I don't know if you can see my highlight there, but it says using ASD ST100 simplified technical English. So you may not know what that is, but it's in the like base knowledge that the models have, and it just forces them to use plain language. It's not too simple. It's just plain and direct, but still technical. And so that has been really great. Um, and then the second one is this is more of a preference of mine, but like I'm just trying to tell the agent, like, look, you don't need to hold my hand. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Just be honest with me. Like, call me out on something if I need it, that kind of thing. So I
yeah,
found both of these to be pretty helpful, but especially this this weird standard is great.
I
And then
like
this
that.
was an experiment I was doing just to see how like effective this Claude MD was, which turns out it's like two-thirds of the time in my experience. I just had it respond using 90s slang unless it inhibited clarity. That was
I
pretty
like
fun.
I like the second part about honest and directness. It's a way to avoid the sycophancy that tends to come commonly from, oh, that's a great idea,
Yes,
very
exactly.
common. And
And
that's
it
one
gets
of the things.
so it's so annoying.
And as an engineer that's constantly learning, I want to be corrected. So I love that. I'm going to definitely use that. Thank you.
All right, we're coming up on our time. Any final questions?
I'm just going to pop in my
Oh, let me.
website link.
Oh,
I
sure.
tend to post there maybe once a month if I'm being good. Um, and you can actually trace the origin story from where I created that Claude.md to actually building Oversight itself. And I plan on writing about anything new, but also I have that we have that GitHub repo where I'm posting any new releases and such, and the change logs should have everything you need. So, yeah, thank you so much, Kyle. This has been great. It's my first webinar, so I hope everyone takes away something from this, even if you don't end up using Oversight. Um, I think that AI agents, using our design systems is really making our roles as front-end engineers and design engineers all the more important. This way you don't have freelance clients coming to you with a broken replit. Speaking from experience.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Rachel. We're so honored that we could be your first webinar. So, and from the chat, it looks like you've built, I mean, I know you've built something very useful. People are excited to get it in their project.
Cool. Well, thank
And
you.
thank you, everybody else. Thanks for joining us. As always, it is a total pleasure. So take care, and we'll see you at the next one.